Oh man, what is up? At Anton Jackson, what is up, everyone? Back again to once again. Uh, I am going crazy right now. Ant, how's it going? I am a little bit off my game right now, so uh, back again to talk about this stream right here. Sorry, a little bit. Yeah, ready for the Jesse Wren. How's it going at Justin Cruz? How's it going at Stone Yoda? What is up at Kate Valentine? Ready to talk about this episode here. It's been a long week. So getting ready to talk about this episode once again. At Stoned Anton. Yeah, exactly. At Stoned. Yeah, definitely at Stoned Anton for sure. I'm definitely a little bit out of it today. That is for sure. But yeah, really excited to talk about this episode. It's nice to get sort of back into the swing of things and talk about, the episode on a sort of weekly basis as opposed to doing one and then not doing one for another couple of months, it seems, which was the case in the early go of things of this series. So, what is up at the bees? How's it going? Happy to be here. Happy for you to be here as well. Really excited to talk about this one at Kate Valentine. Thank you so much for the super chat right off the bat. Really appreciate the support at Kate Valentine. So yeah. Oh my goodness gracious. Let me. God, this setup I'm working with here. Again, I'm not trying to sort of. No sympathy needed, but this is the my God, the remedial setup we got working with here. So I'll try. This is it's neither here nor there. I apologize. That's why I started a little bit late, a little bit of technical difficulties, but yeah, ready to get into this one. And thank you again at Kate Valentine for all the support that you've given to this channel right off the bat. At Stone Yoda, really needed this one today, brother. Glad to be here. Yeah, glad to be here as well. Yeah, really. Yeah, again, a little bit flustered here in the beginning of things. It's been a crazy day. Um, so yeah, ready to break down this episode. I'm kind of stalling before I get into it here, and yeah, it's a great continuation of the story that we saw conclude at the end of the previous episode, where we see Jesse Pinkman, quote unquote, handling it. What Walt asked him to do at the end of the previous episode of Better Call Saul, of Breaking Bad season 2. My God, I can't. My marbles are full of mouth today for any Parks and Recreation fans out there. But yeah, as I talked about in the end of the previous stream, I always did wonder what sort of conversation happened after Walt said to Jesse, "I want you to handle it," because when Walt and Jesse talk in the next episode of Breaking Bad, where he sort of says, he tells Walt what transpired between him and Spooge and his lady. Walt, of course, says, "I meant fear and intimidation. I didn't mean, violence." Sort of course, Jesse not leading on what happened at the very beginning of the conversation, very much bearing the lead here with Walter White. But of course, we'll never know what happened with that conversation. But whatever, whether or not Walter White walked out of the door after he put that gun down on the counter and told Jesse to handle it in his new apartment that he lives in right next to Jane, irrespective of what happened after that, this was Jesse Pinkman's interpretation of what handle it meant. And this was quite the story, to say the least. And after rewatching this episode, it really encompasses two main storylines. Really no other two storylines other than the two that we're about to discuss. One being the story of Jesse, the sort of A story that happens here in this episode, and of course the second story being the B story of Walter White and everything that transpires in his life, including going back to school following his initial round of chemotherapy, as well as his quote-unquote world's most expensive alibi in regards to the fugue state that he lied about in order to sort of give credence to his overarching lie of why in the world he disappeared in the middle of the night from his house without telling his family. And on top of that, we also see the sort of storyline and the more of the backstory between Walter White and his sort of interpreted grievances from Gretchen Schwartz and the sort of fallout of gray matter technologies. And again, I don't want to sort of bury the lead here and sort of jump the gun here in respect to that storyline. We'll eventually get to that story down the line here later in this episode. But yeah, very interesting sort of we really see all the resentments that Walter White had clearly been harboring for all of these years following him leaving gray matter and eventually becoming an overqualified high school chemistry teacher. We see all those resentments that he internalized over the course of his life really come out when he's having that very intense, almost a little bit awkward discussion with Gretchen in the restaurant in Santa Fe. So yeah, great scene there through and through, and really I love the way the story was sort of put together, where the two stories between Walt and Jesse, while of course forever related, are also completely separate here, because Walt's sort of doing his own thing, Jesse's doing his own thing, and the stories sort of ebb and flow here between these two main and supporting protagonists of this wonderful show. But yeah, of course, again, and I keep repeating myself here, but I don't want to get bogged down in just repeating the plot, because we've all seen this episode. We all know what happens. So I'm really going to try to sort of speak very thematically here. And of course, we first see at the very beginning of this episode a great scene of Jesse Pinkman waiting for Skinny Pete here at this stop sign, of course, waiting to sort of find out who in the world were these two junkies who ripped off Skinny Pete during the montage scene at the end of the previous episode. And we see this great shot here of Jesse playing with this, again, I don't know what you sort of call it. It's not quite a cockroach, but it definitely sort of made me harken back to that story that Hank said at the cookout that they had in the previous episode, where the cockroach comes out from under the refrigerator. You don't think, you just step on it. Sort of the analogy of his actions towards Tuco Salamanca. And while it's definitely not a one-to-one comparison here for this scene, this scene here definitely a introduction into truly sort of humanizing Jesse Pinkman and showing that he has a much sort of softer, emotional, much more, almost sort of an emotionally intelligent side to him, if you will, not completely just making his character this two-dimensional meth user who is just very much gives into his emotions, as he tends to do over the course of this series, including this episode right here. And of course, we can see him sort of being one with the nature here, and sort of, again, truly being one with nature, being one with the universe. And this sort of scene here, not to sort of maybe, I don't know, aggrandize too much, but the sort of speech that Walt gives in his classroom about how, everything is made from carbon. We are all sort of tied together by this common life force. At the same time, Jesse Pinkman here is one with this insect as this insect is with Jesse Pinkman. We're all sort of, children of the universe. We're all descendants of this stardust. And again, I'm no Neil deGrasse Tyson. And then you might want to watch, what's the name of that show that everyone talks about on Fox? Oh my God, I'm totally blanking on the name of that show. But yeah, sort of just explain. It's sort of just, in my sort of interpretation, giving a sort of artistic display of how we're all sort of interconnected here. And also Jesse sort of, really humanizing Jesse here. Him not just, gonna kill this insect for no reason, not being sadistic. Sort of, I guess, maybe trying to explain the sort of, and I don't even know if explain is the right word, but definitely sort of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Sort of apologize, if you will, for the sort of very gruff actions that he'll undertake towards Spooge and his lady over the course of this episode, where it really seems as though it's not done just as a sort of sadistic revenge, if you will. Again, I feel like I'm really trying to sort of really get into the sort of a thematic approach of this episode here. But yeah, just a lot of food for thought in all of this, and really could sort of go back and forth and speculate on the artistic nature of this episode for sure. But yeah, it's definitely something to be seen. Yeah, so apologize for that. And of course, we see here this is immediately interrupted by following Jesse sort of playing with this insect. We then see Skinny Pete walk right up towards it and just smash it. Of course, really showing us the contrast in Jesse to Skinny Pete. And again, it is sort of, one of the things that sort of, I don't know if it annoys me is the right word, but definitely sort of, really sort of stands out to me, if you will, regarding how Jesse Pinkman is sort of portrayed as opposed to not every other, but as opposed to the sort of vast amount of other characters in this sort of Albuquerque criminal underworld, where a character like Skinny Pete doesn't really have the sort of same, I guess, humanistic approach, sort of being one with the universe as Jesse Pinkman does here at the very beginning of this episode. But again, at the same time, we have to sort of remember, and the way my mind sort of went to in the scene was following Skinny Pete giving this address to Jesse here, where he says to him, where Jesse then says to him, "How in the world did you misspell the word street?" It definitely did make me think of the fact that we see in the episode entitled Hazard Pay how Skinny Pete was very well versed in the sort of classical piano, and that's definitely something that needs to be sort of learned and taught in a sort of formal educational setting. It's definitely not something you can pick up on your own, I wouldn't imagine. So really sort of adding a lot of complex nuance to Skinny Pete's backstory as well. And again, at the same time, I don't want to sort of be too, what is the sort of phrase? I don't want to be sort of too hard on Skinny Pete here for misspelling the word streets. I definitely sort of go back to that Patrice O'Neill bit regarding misspelling the word restaurants and how he couldn't spell it correctly even if his mother's life depended on it. So again, I don't want to sort of get on Skinny Pete's case too much here in respect to misspelling this word. But of course, following this, really sort of setting up the overall scene here where Jesse is going to enact this revenge against Spooge and his lady. Of course, with the grand overarching premise being, if they don't enact this revenge, as Walter White sort of alluded to in the previous episode, it's open season on you and your crew here, that you can be robbed with impunity, and it's not about the $2,000 that you lost. It's more about the non-sustainable business model. And of course, Jesse here, despite him having some initial reservations about doing this, as we can obviously see by his sort of demeanor here in this scene, Skinny Pete, of course, saying that he would be willing to do it, but he's on probation. Definitely not the most smart decisions by Skinny Pete right here for sure. Selling methamphetamine while on probation. Pretty sure that's not legal, but what are you going to do? Pretty funny scene there where I also wondered what he said there in respect to these two, they need to get got. So I thought he maybe said, these two need to get God, sort of these two people sort of need to have a come to Jesus moment. But according to the subtitles, they need to get got, sort of, they need to get what's coming to them. No one's going to miss when they're gone, these sort of irrational, erratic methamphetamine users. And of course, following Skinny Pete walking off in the distance, we then see Jesse Pinkman getting some, smoke courage, if you will. Definitely sort of think to the fact that if for any history majors out there during World War II, if you've read or heard about this, Germany would use amphetamines and give them to their soldiers prior to battle in order to give them a sort of lack of inhibition and make them sort of more fearless, if you will, before they went onto the battlefield. Of course, there are definitely long-term ramifications of that were not positive in the slight, that were not positive at all. But of course, Jesse here definitely needing some sort of pump up here in the sort of same manner by which this is used as a sort of performance enhancer. Methamphetamine, and at the same time, it definitely makes me harken back to any time there's any ever emotional adversity in Jesse Pinkman's life, he tends to very steadily resort to the methamphetamine use through and through. But that's just kind of the nature of Jesse Pinkman's character. It's definitely always something that I've always wondered about when he sort of finally makes his way in Alaska, where it's sort of implied that he's finally come to terms with his demons, he's finally accepted who he is, and he's finally ready to move on with his life. But of course, he said that again and again and again over the course of Breaking Bad as a series. But, despite the fact where even at the very beginning of season 3 of Breaking Bad, he told Walter White in the episode entitled Caballo Sin Nombre when he picked him up from the... or was it the episode entitled Caballo Sin Nombre? No, I think it was the previous episode entitled No Mas, if I'm not mistaken, where, he says to Walt that I'm done using. Yeah, he sort of said that in the moment, of course, down the line when he and Badger and Skinny Pete were testing that blue stuff that he cooked in his house. He said, I can watch, but, I'm good. I'm done using this. Again and again and again, he keeps saying that. And, I guess if we sort of take the movie at its word that Jesse Pinkman is finally ready to move on here following the end of El Camino, at the same time, I do wonder, the slightest setback in Alaska, maybe he'll end up resorting to that amphetamine use as he's done previously in his life. So again, Jesse's definitely not the best at sort of tackling adversity, if you will, and he's not the best at sort of articulating his emotions and feelings. And neither is, a lot of people. It definitely takes a lot of time to sort of be able to do that and to really open up as a human being and as an individual. It definitely takes years. Jesse Pinkman's in his late 20s when El Camino ends. Late 20s, early 30s. So he's such a young man. I mean, truly, very sort of emotionally stunted, if you will. So I guess plenty of time for Jesse Pinkman to sort of reflect on his decisions that he made over the course of Breaking Bad. But it's definitely sort of where my mind went to as I was watching this cold opening scene here, with Jesse Pinkman sort of smoking the blue stuff and getting ready to go enact this revenge against Spooge and his lady. So yes, following this, we then see this cold opening scene immediately continue and pick back up here, following Jesse walking from his car to their house, and of course, I actually have to step away 1 second. Sorry about that. I apologize. Yeah, it's Stone Yoda. Great scene here for sure. Where's my money? Him really trying to pump himself up here. Really, again, sort of interjecting the comedy here in this episode. That's really sort of dark and really tough to watch at Stone Yoda. And I've definitely talked to people who watched Breaking Bad after I did. And after they watched sort of Peekaboo, I heard a lot of people sort of tell me, man, that was a tough episode to watch. I don't think I can sort of watch another episode like this. And it really is. This is a really sort of emotionally sort of difficult episode to watch. And, it's definitely not my favorite episode by far, in respect to the fact of just how sort of emotionally traumatic it is for all of these characters and all the sort of, real coming to terms with their emotions that we see over the course of this episode. And it's definitely not, again, it's been a long time since I've rewatched this episode. This one's really tough to watch. Just all the sort of very just dark sort of elements that are present here in this episode, but at the same time, there is some sort of comedy that is attempted to be interjected by the creators here. Great scene here with the mailman sort of making small talk to Jesse and interrupting him just as he's about to sort of attempt to ambush Spooge here. And of course, this scene here was sort of the exact opposite of how I thought, Mike Ehrmantraut would probably sort of enact a sort of revenge scene over the course of Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. Because, I mean, for goodness sakes, I mean, Jesse Pinkman just smashes the window just in broad daylight, clearly not sort of articulating and contemplating his emotions that strongly here. Definitely under the influence of methamphetamine, which is going to cause him to sort of make poor decisions absolutely through and through. And definitely just, really sort of made me think of, as I was watching this sort of scene here, it really sort of made me think of just all of the things that Mike Ehrmantraut would not do over the course of this scene here, where he probably would be wearing gloves. He wouldn't just have his bare fingerprints touching everything. He would probably have a gun with a silencer as opposed to a gun that doesn't have a silencer should he ever have to use it. I mean, the window is wide open. If a gunshot went off, everyone could hear everything. Just, smashing the window like this in broad daylight, definitely not the sort of epitome of stealth by any stretch of the imagination for Jesse Pinkman here. But of course, initially being very sort of, I don't know what the word is here, almost like acting as you think he would act, sort of casing the place, trying to figure out if anyone's inside. When he eventually finds out that no one's here, he sort of sits down and just sort of contemplates, what he's gonna do. again, really sort of crazy here. I mean, when Jesse's sitting down on this couch, I mean, this place is in absolute sort of disarray. I'd be afraid of sort of sitting on a hypodermic needle or something and catching all sorts of sort of communicable diseases that Spooge and his lady may have had. But yeah, just definitely, again, we have to remember Jesse is high under the influence of methamphetamine through and through here. And of course, a great scene here where eventually this red-headed child walks out of his bedroom and sits down on the couch and turns on this sort of TV infomercial channel. Jesse sort of very taken aback by this scene here. Definitely very quickly putting two and two together and realizing that this child is the likely the child of Spooge and his lady. And yeah, I mean, just to sort of get right into it here, over the course of this episode, it's definitely something I've thought about how and again, it's definitely an argument that's been made against the sort of use of drugs in our society, about how the sort of I don't know, unintended slash direct consequence of adults using hard drugs is that oftentimes children such as this are impacted by the decision of these adults. And sort of who do we put that responsibility on? Does Jesse bear any responsibility in the fact that this child is living this absolute sort of horrible existence, this life of squalor, just covered in filth? His parents going out to rob an ATM machine, not caring at all about this child. Does Jesse bear any responsibility for being the one who manufactures the methamphetamine that they use? I mean, again, that's the sort of philosophical sort of debate that we can have till the cows come home. Does Jesse bear any moral responsibility for this at all? Or is it just sort of Spooge and his lady's fault? Is this not Jesse Pinkman's fault? Would these people be terrible parents, irrespective of whether or not Jesse Pinkman cooked methamphetamine at all? Could we say, even if Jesse and Walt didn't cook meth, they would still get their meth from somewhere? So, my hands are I wash my hands of any sort of moral responsibility of the fact that these people are using my product and clearly incapacitating themselves and making it so they're not taking care of this child, and this child is absolutely suffering sort of because of me. Again, that's sort of the grand scheme of things. And again, I don't have the answer to that question. I really don't know. I know a lot of people have made that argument in respect to children being the unintended consequences of people using hard drugs. And I know there are people out there who believe that these hard drugs should be absolutely legalized. But of course, that's a discussion. I've talked about that in the past. I don't want to sort of go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, it's just a sort of very interesting scene here where Jesse, and again, just sort of to add insult to injury here, him saying, don't you want to watch Mr. Rogers or a kid show or something? Why are you watching this infomercial of this man selling knives? And of course, as he proceeds to change the channel in this just house covered in filth, garbage everywhere, things that they likely stole and are hoarding. I mean, there's a false leg that Jesse Pinkman sees in this scene. At the same time, hypodermic needles everywhere, just beer bottles, broken glass, everything here, this absolute squalor that this child lives in. And Jesse seeing to add insult to this injury, he can't even watch Sesame Street. This is the only channel on this old television that he has to watch. So yeah, great scene here, sort of setting up where the story is going to go. And as I talked about, for anyone just tuning in, what is up at Tim Coofer? Coofer. Sorry if I mispronounced that name. How much more responsibility does Jesse bear, if any, for the suffering of this child? And again, this is just one child in the sort of grand scheme of things. There is no way, just the probability of averages, there is no way in the world that this is the only child that is suffering as a result of citizens of Albuquerque using Walter White and Jesse Pinkman's methamphetamine. And, there's probably many, many more children suffering just like this child is suffering from right here. And, I mean, you even see these very sobering stories in real life. I mean, I've seen, images and stories on the local news of parents just shooting up H, if you will, in their arm for the algorithm, shooting H in their arm and just absolutely passed out, nodded off on this opioid. And in the backseat of their car, you see a child sort of strapped up in the back seat with their parents just totally overdosing on opioids. So, I mean, this is absolutely a real thing that happens in our society where, it's absolutely just, in many ways, heartbreaking to think about just the way that so many children have to suffer from the sort of actions and consequences of the parents that they have. And, a lot of it is just sort of the luck of the draw. I mean, I'm sort of bastardizing and probably maybe incorrectly summarizing the argument of Malcolm Gladwell, but, so much of our circumstances, if not all, are really just based on luck, just the sort of luck of the sort of accident of birth in the universe. And this child right here did not get to choose his parents, did not get to choose his upbringing, but this is the sort of, upbringing that he finds himself in. And in the grand scheme of things, I mean, compared to even the life that, Jesse Pinkman might as well have been, Bill Gates' children compared to the sort of life that this child has right here. The opportunities that Jesse Pinkman had in his life were just exponentially so compared to just the horrible sort of bad hand that this kid was dealt right here. And I mean, there's so many different angles that you could sort of, just harp on forever and ever in respect to this child here. But yeah, this is definitely something that I've sort of thought about in respect to all of this. But like I said, it's really a philosophical argument, and one of the things that's so frustrating about philosophy is that there's no right answer to any of this. People have been having this debate since Socrates and Plato, ancient Greece, trying to figure out the sort of, what's right and what's wrong in the universe, what's the meaning of life. They've been having this debate for thousands of years, and you know what? We still don't have the answer. We still don't have, any sort of consensus. You ask one person, it's one thing. You ask another person, it's another thing, which is what's so, in some ways, can be somewhat frustrating in respect to, the sort of existence and reality that we all find ourselves living in. So yeah, definitely some food for thought when I was watching this episode right here. Yeah, it's Stone Yoda. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of people that come from horrible, horrible circumstances. And again, the sort of question that I keep asking myself, and again, you wonder at the very end of this episode, I mean, just based on Jesse Pinkman's actions, the fact that he eventually goes back to sort of manufacturing methamphetamine despite this experience that he has in this episode right here, whether or not he says, maybe I am causing this suffering, but, there's nothing I can do. It's just the way of the universe. It's, it's not fair, but it is what it is. Again, we'll never know what was going through Jesse Pinkman's head. We'll never know. And again, we can try to have this debate back and forth at Stone Yoda, but again, it seemed just so futile, when really you could talk for hours, and at the end of the day, you would really come up with no consensus. So, yeah, Justin Cruz, I felt bad for the redhead kid, me too. At Tim Cooper, I guess more points of help for new parents would be good. Yeah, again, that's a whole nother thing, but I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be any good parents out there at Tim who are using H and amphetamines. I don't know if it's even possible to be a good parent if you're using speedballs all day, so... But yeah, really setting up the sort of A story here at the very beginning of this episode. And of course, following this, we get a brief sort of phone call by Marie, trying to make small talk, of course. Skyler sort of lets this one go to voicemail, but then following this, she gets a call from Gretchen Schwartz. And of course, following ignoring her sister, or ignoring, I don't know, screening her call, not maybe wanting to talk to her right now, she definitely, when Gretchen calls, she uses this as an opportunity to call her and, of course, thank her for everything that she's done in regards to paying for Walter White's treatment. But, of course, as we can see from right here on the look on Gretchen's face, she was told by Walter White in the episode entitled Gray Matter that, his insurance would cover all of it and he would not need their money. But at the same time, she's now putting the story together where, what he told me is not what he told his family, what's going on here. And of course, when I watched this the very first time, you wonder, what's Gretchen going to say? Is she going to come clean here? And of course, following her being very taken aback and almost, perturbed by what Skyler is saying here in this scene, Skyler, of course, says, I'd love to speak with you sometime. And Gretchen, given the opportunity, says, how about right now, how I can come by right this afternoon? And which is, of course, the premise by which Gretchen will visit Skyler, and as well as see Walter White and Walt Jr. in this sort of it's a very sort of awkward confrontation that has been building ever since Walter White turned down her offer to pay for his treatment in full. So yeah, perplexed for sure at Justin Cruz. That is a good way to summarize it. Absolutely perplexed. Regarding why Walter White lied to her. At Luke Cockburn, funny thing is the claim that no claim is correct is a claim to be correct. You can't win. I mostly agree, though. That's kind of true. That's kind of true. I know what you mean at Luke Cockburn. That's a great point you raised about how I'm kind of saying, it's definitive that the no claim is correct is definitive, but at the same time, someone can say, no, that's not correct. Some claims are definitive. So yeah, that is, and again, I feel like we could go back and forth. Again, it's back to the Princess Bride, You think that I think that you think that I think, literally in perpetuity for eternity at Luke Cockburn, which again, it's like, man, the people who try to find the answers to the universe, man, it can definitely drive you crazy sometimes, and a lot of people have been driven to madness, if you will, sort of, searching for meaning and sort of trying to find the sort of answer to the universe. But yes, of course, following this, we then sort of we continue with the B story here. We see Walter White return to work following him taking the hiatus, following his fugue state, as well as his chemotherapy first round of treatment. And of course, he's teaching his class about carbon. And again, I sort of talked about the sort of metaphor maybe that the creators were alluding to into sort of the bug. Again, there's so many different layers to the sort of Jesse playing with the bug at the beginning of the scene that I talked about at the beginning of the stream. But at the same time, talking about how, we're all made from carbon. We're all sort of intertwined. We're all sort of, one with the universe, if you will. That's sort of the, what I sort of took from Walter White. If I was sitting in Walter White's classroom right now, or at the time this was going on, that's sort of what I would have sort of taken from his lecture here. Of course, Carmen walks in to observe. I mean, I remember in high school, sometimes the principal would walk into a class and observe for a few minutes. But of course, she's doing this because this is the first time that Walt has been back in quite a while. He's gone through a lot of health scares. I'm sure it's gotten the fugue state has definitely gotten around. Human beings, word of mouth. People like to gossip and discuss what's going on. This will be further indicated by the fact that we see the sort of missing persons poster at the very beginning of this episode, sort of going full circle in the sort of the maybe the thinking and the backstory behind Carmen's actions here in the scene. And of course, a great scene here for sure, really sort of prefacing this meeting between Gretchen and Walt, when he sort of gives the backstory of this man H. Tracy Hall, who worked for General Electric and invented synthetic diamonds. And of course, he invented this groundbreaking sort of scientific breakthrough, which is used in so many industrial purposes. The invention was worth millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars. But of course, him saying that, how Dr. H. Tracy Hall was rewarded by this big company for his work with a $10 savings bond, basically getting, pennies on the dollar. From what his research was actually worth. And of course, the entire story has not sort of been crafted yet, but we definitely can sort of see, and with the benefit of hindsight, where this entire story was going here for sure. But of course, in the episode entitled Buyout, way down the line in season 5 of Breaking Bad, where Walt talks about how he took a $5,000 buyout from Gray Matter for his share of the company. And maybe that's what the shares were worth at the time, but of course now it trades on this sort of exchange for over $3 billion. Again, I don't know sort of how much of the company that Gretchen and Elliot own, how much is owned by the sort of the inside, how much they as insiders own of the company. Do they own 50% of that company? Do they own 40, 30, 20%? What percent of the shares do they own? Sort of the publicly traded company? We'll never know because it's never displayed to us. But again, definitely sort of foreshadowing the resentment that Walter White feels in respect to how he feels like his groundbreaking research and scientific discovery was really sort of taken from him, and he was not properly or adequately compensated for his research. Again, that's sort of what this scene, this lecture here is alluding to. And I love how the creators of this show sort of always use the lectures in Walter White's classroom to sort of foreshadow and be a metaphor for the broad overarching story that takes place over the course of said episode where that lecture occurs in. And yeah, definitely some real sort of emotional empathy and sort of seeing oneself in this Dr. H. Tracy Hall by Walter White here in this scene. And it's a great sort of empathy here that he displays towards this doctor, and definitely clearly indicating that he himself feels aggrieved in the same manner. Of course, when he sort of tells this story, everyone sort of awkwardly looks on, including Carmen, and then of course he moves on from this discussion. But yeah, definitely a lot of resentments that Walter White has clearly been harboring over the course of his life, despite the fact that he was this Mr. Chips character who really did nothing wrong, and on the surface was this sort of genial, very sort of happy-go-lucky, leave it to Beaver type of person. At the same time, Walter White definitely was, clearly harboring these resentments. They were clearly somewhere deep down inside of him. And who knows whether it was the cancer diagnosis, likely the cancer diagnosis, is what caused these sort of resentments to truly boil over, and all of these sort of things that he was repressing, and the chips that he had on each shoulder from how he felt that he was aggrieved over the course of his life completely came out when he told off Gretchen as he did in that restaurant in Santa Fe. So, of course, following the end of class, we see Carmen and Walt have this discussion. And, of course, when I first watched this, I sort of wondered. So initially, it's very sort of cordial, small talk. What is up at Hine? Yeah, I did just get started here. But, of course, at the very beginning of the scene, I wondered sort of where this sort of... what was the sort of premise of this scene, and what Carmen was sort of alluding to here when she sort of set Walt aside and had this conversation where she basically said, if you have anything you need to or want to discuss with me, I'm always available, completely confidential, if you ever want to sort of confide in me emotionally. And I always sort of wondered initially what Carmen was alluding to, but as I discussed a little bit earlier, it definitely seems to me that sort of, word of mouth probably has spread throughout, J.P. Wynn High School and the sort of local community regarding Walter White and his own personal health, as well as the fugue states, and who knows, maybe even the sort of, you would wonder if maybe if any sort of rift between Skyler and Walt somehow sort of came out and was told to Carmen by Skyler. Again, we don't know. We know that I believe Carmen was at that baby shower back in season 1 of Breaking Bad. So, again, I don't know how close of friends Skyler and Carmen are, but irrespective of whether or not she knows about the comings and goings and inner workings of their relationship and the fact that it's on the rocks, I mean, clearly, at least, clearly based on what we've seen over the course of this season in the moment, at the same time, with the whole fugue state and everything that's going on with all of his struggles. I mean, this sort of, poster here on the car. I mean, of course, people clearly knowing in the Albuquerque community that Walter White had been missing, and, word of mouth travels very quickly. People, like I said, human beings by nature sort of like to sort of gossip and like to sort of hear all of the sort of information and what's going on here. So, of course, Carmen sort of, saying that, clearly a lot's going on. You've been dealt a bad hand, a lot of sort of mental issues. As well as physical ailments with the cancer. I'm here to, to be a sort of friend you can confide in. And of course, initially Walt seems very sort of perplexed by Carmen's sort of offer here. But yeah, that's just sort of, again, a little bit of an ambiguous scene. It wasn't outwardly displayed to us in concrete, but that's sort of the way I interpreted this scene here in this episode. And of course, following Walt seeing the, this flyer on his car, clearly sort of trolling him here. I'm missing my pants. I'm buck naked. Again, yeah, that too, word of mouth, clearly, getting by that. I almost forgot about that, how probably that is sort of, transpired as well throughout the community, where everyone knows that Walt was found naked in a supermarket. And of course, just based on the sort of what he was diagnosed with, that sort of made it this sort of egregious sort of, social deviation, sort of socially acceptable, because it was rooted in some sort of, mental disorientation or mental confusion. But yeah, that's definitely likely a part of sort of Carmen's, I guess, decision to sort of say, I'm here as a resource if you ever need someone to confide in. At Hine, I did talk about that at the beginning of this stream. This is a tough one to watch, and I've definitely talked to people who watched Breaking Bad after I did, and they have told me as much that they said, man, that Peekaboo episode was tough, man. I can't watch another episode like that. That one was tough. And yeah, for the many reasons I discussed so far, it is very upsetting. But as you say, at the same time, it's a perfect example of Jesse having a good heart, as we discussed in the last episode. Yes, that is a huge part of all of this, which I will absolutely get to at Hine. But of course, following Walt crumpling up the poster and basically saying it's nothing despite Walter Jr. wanting to see it. The story then cuts back to the A story here. We see, of course, yeah, I actually omitted in the previous scene that it's somewhat concluded with this young redheaded child telling Jesse that he's hungry, and of course Jesse, the sort of natural, sort of biological instinct that he has to, I guess, be sort of caring and nurturing to young children. Again, that's sort of the overarching sort of premise of Jesse Pinkman, where he has this sort of red line in the sand where children being harmed is sort of his breaking point, as we clearly see over the course of Breaking Bad with when he finds out about the fact that Brock was poisoned, including this sort of experience that he has right here, not to mention what happens with Tomas, what happens with Drew Sharp. Jesse really sort of, having this good heart at Hine, which, is a debatable, ambiguous term in my humble opinion, but a pretty great scene here where he makes him this, what is this, like marshmallow fluffernutter sandwich for this young child, because that's pretty much all that's around. And of course, at the same time, he plays this peekaboo game with this child. Probably the first time that this child ever sort of experienced anything like this. Jesse just trying to sort of emotionally bond and, trying to brighten this kid's life in any way, shape, or form. And, like I said, the grand irony in all of this that I talked about a little bit earlier is that, like, yes, Jesse feels horrible for this child. He's trying to cheer him up. He sort of has this natural sort of inclination and bond and gravitation towards this child and, the innocence of this child. And this child did nothing wrong in his life and absolutely, is not, does not, because of the sort of the nature of his birth, deserve, what's going on in his life. He absolutely was dealt this absolute crap hand that he had absolutely nothing to do with and is paying the consequences of it. But at the same time, yeah, Stone Yoda, he saved this kid, but at the same time, in my opinion, again, it's debatable at the end of the day, but, at the grand irony, his parents are using the product that Jesse Pinkman cooks. And at best case scenario, we can say that Jesse is truly ignorant to just the monumentally destructive nature of the blue meth that they cook on the lives of the people who use it. I mean, just look at the sort of users of methamphetamine over the course of this show. I mean, Spooge and his lady. I mean, just think about where Spooge sort of was before he was a meth user in the episode entitled Hit and Run, when he met Saul Goodman in the back of the nail salon, compared to where his life eventually will go. I mean, this drug is just unbelievably self-destructive to anyone who uses it. And I mean, you think about sort of Tucker in season 4 of Breaking Bad, who's digging the hole in front of the house, and just all of the various meth heads that they sort of run into over the course of this series. The ones who are living in Jesse's house in season 4 of Breaking Bad, and at the end of the day, like, yes, Jesse feels terrible about this child, but you wonder. I mean, I don't think he did. I don't think he sort of has the sort of emotional intelligence. That sounds really sort of, insulting and condescending, but I don't think sort of Jesse sort of reflected it in that way about where he sort of bore any of his own moral responsibility for the sort of life that this child finds himself in. And like I said, we can talk about this little cows come home. You could say, yes, these people would use drugs anyway, even if I didn't even exist, so it's not my fault. But again, you can sort of use that sort of nihilism to justify basically anything. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing I can do about it, so I'm going to just keep continuing doing what I'm doing. These big corporations pollute way more than I do. Who cares if I recycle? I mean, again, that's a whole nother thing about the sort of efficacy of recycling, but I don't want to get into that. There's probably better examples that I can sort of make in respect to that. But I feel like a better one would be like sort of using a sort of, a gas-powered car or something like that. It's like, I guess technically, yes, that does pollute the environment, but you could sort of, in many ways you could justify and rationalize this as saying, like, my God, some of these corporations just pump so much more carbon in the air than I do from my sort of Ford Malibu. So I have to sort of, do public transportation and take the bus, and I have to suffer but why should I do all of that when, people are doing it even worse than I'm doing it? Again, it's a very nihilistic sort of approach. I get, it sort of justifies, people will do these drugs anyway, so why can't I sort of manufacture this stuff and make the sort of best sort of possible product for these people? Again, it's pretty much what Gail Bedecker said in season 3 of Breaking Bad about how, consenting adults are going to use this anyway. I'm at least offering them exactly what they paid for. Again, I'm sort of spacing at Luke Cockburn. At the end of the day, philosophy isn't it the best, but yeah, I wish I had answers to all of this. But again, it's very intellectually stimulating to discuss, in my humble opinion. But yes, continuing after this, following Jesse playing peekaboo with this child, it's then revealed to us that Jesse hears Spooge and his lady coming home. Again, they're in the back. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, we know that they just boosted an ATM machine. And of course, following this, Jesse puts the kid in his room and says, be here, be quiet, don't come out. Not wanting this child to see what is going to happen to his parents following him exiting his bedroom. But of course, following this, Jesse ambushes Spooge and his lady by just bashing Spooge over the head with the barrel of the gun. Yes, philosophy, it is fun at Luke Cockburn. It is fun for sure. And yeah, maybe one day some philosopher will figure it out, but I have a feeling they're going to be talking about it for thousands and thousands and thousands of more years, and they're still not going to have a concrete answer to all of this at Luke Cockburn. That's my natural inclination in all of this. But of course, following this, we see the sort of I don't know if climax is the right word, but I guess it's sort of the sort of apex of the scene finally happens. All of the building that's happening to this eventual meeting between these two characters, with Jesse Pinkman, following them ripping off Skinny Pete in the previous episode. We see Jesse sort of ambush them and, basically, really sort of setting up where this scene is going to go. Of course, before we get there, teasing us a little bit, the scene then sort of cuts back to the B story here with Walt and Walter Jr. in the car, and of course, we see Walt sort of going back to that poster that was put on his car, sort of saying, here's what we do. We kidnap them, we put a hood over their heads, we tie them up and take them to the desert, strip them naked and bury them up to their neck and dump them with fire ants on their head. Of course, saying I saw it in the movie, and at the same time, the fire ants at Stone Yoda. At the same time, Walter Jr. saying, why not scorpions? Yeah, at Rena Rocha, yeah, definitely changing things up at Rena Rocha. I see what you did there, but yeah, bald because I chose to be at Rena Rocha for sure. But yes, continuing this, we then, of course, they're bonding here initially, and of course, Walt trying to make light and sort of joke about what's going on. Sort of joke about the sort of insult that was, I guess, put on him by these students putting on this flyer onto his car. But of course, what's the sort of grand irony in all of this is he's saying this sort of very sort of sadistic plot here. But of course, in the moment, at least the way Walter Jr. interprets this, is that he's clearly sort of joking. He's sort of, almost trolling, if you will, making light of the situation, sort of saying what he was going to do to these kids who did this to him. And clearly, it's kind of like when you say to someone, "Man, if I wish I could sort of, I want to kill this guy." And again, it's absolutely a euphemism when someone says it in society. You're so angry I could kill someone, or I wish someone was dead. Again, it's sort of a euphemism that people tend to say. It's a sort of hyperbolic sort of sentence that people tend to express when they're very, very angry. But of course, the sort of implication is that you're so angry you could literally sort of commit a heinous crime against this person. Again, you're being metaphorical, you're being facetious, and that's what Walt is clearly sort of putting on and alluding to here. But the way my mind sort of went to was the fact that the grand irony is that in a few episodes from now, while he's not going to sort of strip Saul Goodman naked and dump scorpions and or fire ants on his head. My God, I can't talk right now. A little bit flustered. The grand irony is that he's talking about kidnapping, tying someone up and putting a hood over their head facetiously and hyperbolically. But what's what's ironic is the fact that he is literally going to do this with Jesse Pinkman in a few episodes from now. And that's the sort of, grand irony in all of this is that it's despite clearly, a very sort of, normal, sane person who's not going to sort of enact these sort of egregious, heinous crimes could sort of make a joke like this. What's ironic about this, I definitely need a thesaurus, need to find a different word besides ironic, is that Walt is literally trudging down this sort of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Sort of ethical and moral path where he is literally going to enact, retribution against people in the future. And I mean, it is sort of retribution that he enacts against Saul Goodman, where he, isn't sort of initially buying into his plan of not talking to the DEA in order to sort of, enact this revenge and get him to do what he wants, he's going to kidnap him. So again, I feel like that was sort of very long-winded of an explanation of me trying to explain a very sort of inconsequential scene in the grand sort of scheme of things, and really sort of putting on the sort of, the philosophical hat here and trying to explain away the scene, trying to extrapolate this scene out to where Walter White's character is eventually going to go down the line in the series. But again, very sort of telling scene here for sure. But of course, following this lighthearted discussion between these two characters, we then see Walter Jr. saying, "Oh, nice car. Whose Bentley is this in our driveway?" And of course, you can even see the vanity plates here of Gray MTR, Gray Matter. And of course, following this, we see, oh my goodness, this look that Walter White has on his face here, just the OS look on his face, where, oh my goodness gracious, my whole plan could just blow up in my face completely here. This entire sort of lie that I have just been spinning and concocting and building off of ever since my cancer diagnosis could completely blow up in my face here, where I told Gretchen one thing, I told my family another thing. They're literally in the same room. They literally wanted to discuss the subject matter that I lied to about them with. Oh my God, is this all going to end for me? That's sort of the way I sort of interpreted Walter White's expression on his face right here. If you can see this, if my big ugly face isn't, I think my big ugly face might be covering up Walter White's face here, but my goodness gracious, this look on Walt's face right here, for any Seinfeld fans, I've been watching some Seinfeld reruns lately. This scene right here, and again, also very ironic, need to find a different word. This scene right here, ironic because Bryan Cranston played Tim Whatley, the dentist in Seinfeld. This scene right here just screamed of George Costanza seeing a sort of lies and seeing a bunch of his lies and his plan just completely blowing up in his face, sometimes involving two women, also very ironically. At Matt D, I apologize for that. Shout out to Hazel. May you rest in peace. How old was your cat? I know cats can live quite long. I know they can sometimes live like in the high teens, sometimes in the early 20s of years of life, which is pretty long for a cat. Not that helps your any emotional suffering that you may be experiencing. 16. I mean, I feel like that's. I apologize at Matt D. That sucks. Pets are pretty awesome. So I apologize that you lost your cat today. Um, yeah, words kind of escaped me. Yeah, at Hine, Bryan Cranston was absolutely great as Dr. Tim Whatley. Great for sure. But of course, following Walt, maybe initially thinking that everything is going to blow up in his face, he initially puts on airs and engages in this small talk, these sort of gracious cordialities that small talk that one tends to do when you meet someone after having not seen them for a very long time, and of course, following the initial sort of lack of awkwardness, the awkwardness is then turned up to, on a scale of 1 to 10, turned up to a 69 when Walter Jr. thanks Gretchen for everything that she has done in respect to providing for his family and paying for his father's cancer treatment. And again, I mean, if a picture doesn't tell 1,000 words here, I mean, the look on Gretchen's face when Walter Jr. is thanking her, the look on Walt's face when Walter Jr. is thanking her, just saying like, are you gonna throw me under the bus here? Is this gonna end here? Or are you going to sort of, what are you going to do here? I am powerless in this situation. I truly am. I mean, I could try to sort of spin a web of lies if you come clean, but exactly, at Stone Yoda, that emoji sums it up perfectly. But yeah, sort of, you wondering what Gretchen's going to say here, but of course, following Walter Jr. and Skyler thanking her, she then says, you're welcome, and doesn't say the truth that she did not pay for Walt's cancer treatment, does not sort of give into the lie that Walt told his family, again, being very introspective. And again, I can only imagine is the sort of, pounding, sort of heart-racing palpitations that he must have been experiencing before Gretchen gave that answer. His character just powerless, just so fearful that his sort of, all of his lies would be exposed here in this scene. But of course, again, again, immediately followed by some relief, I would imagine, following this. But of course, following this sort of question by Walter Jr., Gretchen then uses this as an opportunity to say that she has to leave. Of course, not wanting to continue on any longer. Maybe herself not wanting to sort of continue with these lies, maybe not being comfortable lying here, but sort of, I guess, for the greater good, maybe sort of keeping up appearances and sort of playing into Walt's hand here. Sort of doing Walt a solid again. We'll never know what was going on in Gretchen's head. We can only speculate as to why she did not give up Walt's lie to his family here. But of course, following this, Walt then, under the guise of saying that he wants to walk her to her car, of course, telling Gretchen, we need to talk. Please don't tell anything to anyone until we talk. Of course, following Walt's pleading, Gretchen then drives away off into the distance. We don't know whether or not she's going to oblige Walt in this request. And Walt is sort of left to, again, just sort of stand here and fester and sort of linger in whether or not Gretchen is going to keep up this facade that he has. And of course, with it then cutting to commercial here when you're watching this episode, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, any sort of anxiousness or sort of fear and anticipation is, of course, dissipated. But in the moment, of course, you wonder what sort of Gretchen's next move is going to be. At Hine, I would imagine so. Yeah, I would imagine so. When you're just powerless and that, when you're in a situation where you're just absolutely powerless and hoping that it sort of goes how you want it to go at Hine, for sure. But of course, following this, the story then picks up with the A story here with Saul. Oh my God, I can't talk. Oh my God, I'm just been stumbling over my words this whole time. But of course, Jesse, continuing here with Spooge and his lady, of course, insisting that he gets his money back as well as his dope. Of course, requesting that they empty their pockets here. And of course, without sort of getting into all the horrible details, following Jesse realizing that when it's not in their pockets, it's not on their person. It's only one. Well, actually, it is on their person. If it's not in their pockets, it's only one other place that it could be because they're not going to sort of leave it in the house. He then says to remove it from their cavities, if you will. And I will say, for the benefit of the doubt, that Jesse Pinkman is under the influence of methamphetamine here, so he is definitely not sort of making. That's Stone Yoda. My in their person, yes. My feelings exactly the vomiting emoji, but I know that Jesse Pinkman was under the influence of methamphetamine here in this scene, so he's probably not thinking very rationally, but if two methamphetamine users pulled out plastic bags that were in their rectum, if you will, and put it on the table, the last thing in this universe I would want to do is touch it without sort of any sterile gloves. Talk about Jesse being a little bit underprepared in this element right here and right now. I mean, I don't know if it's very sanitary where you can sort of pull up the sleeves of your sweater and touch the plastic bags full of the drugs that were in their person. So yeah, that was absolutely freaking disgusting. And at the same time, of course, he realizes, you stole an ounce from me. Where's the rest of it? Spooge then saying that his skank lady lost it all. Jesse then, of course, saying, if you can't pay me back my money, if you can't give me back my meth, I am absolutely going to make it my life's mission for you to never get high ever again. Really grandstanding here, if you will. But of course, Jesse was tweaking just as much as these two tweakers right here, and that's the sort of grand irony and sort of the thing that I didn't even think about until you mentioned that at Justin Cruz about how literally every single person in this situation is just under the influence of methamphetamine. You literally have a sort of meth head spat, if you will, that's going on here in this story. And following this, we then see the child sort of not run out, but come out of his room, following all of the commotion that he's clearly hearing. And of course, his lady initially sort of comes to the child and really sort of puts on airs that she sort of really cares about this child and loves it, but at the end of the day, just based on her sort of actions over the course of the remainder of this episode, it is really sort of sad to see that she's using this child as sort of a prop an emotional prop as well as a physical prop, a sort of human shield, emotionally and physically speaking, which is pretty effing messed up of this person right here. And despite all the issues that Jesse may have with his mom or anyone might have with their mother, I mean, my goodness gracious, imagine being born and having this be your mom. I mean, it's just, you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. It's just, it's repulsive to even think about and even consider. But that's this sort of the sad nature of our universe where some people are just some children are just dealt really bad hands. But without wanting to get, too depressing here, getting back into sort of the main story of all this, where Spooge, following this, and of course, great shirt here for sure, a Winer Diner 69er, why not? You definitely sort of, this episode needed some just, comedic relief. There was so little of it. It's such an emotionally dark episode. It's such a tough one to watch. As I talked about at the beginning of this stream, it's not one that I've seen in quite a while. It's definitely not an episode where I feel like there's some episodes I want to just watch again and again. This is not one of them. This is not one of them by a long shot for damn sure. This is so emotionally tough to watch this episode, and it's definitely something that again, like I said, the fact that they have this clearly, he's wearing this shirt intentionally to sort of someone say, oh, that's hilarious. That's some sort of comedic relief. Where despite the immensely emotionally dark nature of this scene, we still have a Spooge wearing this shirt here. At Kate Valentine, yes, he is an anti-dentite. Yep, absolutely. Walter White is absolutely no, or Jesse is an anti-dentite. Who's the anti-dentite? I'm sort of missing it in the conversation here, but someone is an anti-dentite. That is for sure. That is a great pull there at Kate Valentine. That is a great episode for sure. But of course, following Spooge just absolutely being taken aback by the prospect of never getting high again, he says, "Hey man, no problem. We got your money plus interest." Basically, then going out back, sort of saying, me and and my lady just boosted it. Let's bust it open and get high. Jesse's saying, what the heck? Didn't someone see you? What are you doing? Why would you rip off this ATM? Basically saying, we were in and out of there like the wind. No one saw us. Again, I'm bastardizing the dialogue here, of course. But at Stone Yoda, it really does feel like a GTA mission. That is a great pull right there. At Hine, oh man, that is... Mike, I love these Seinfeld references. It offends me as a comedian. That is so great. That is so great. Oh my goodness, that is such a pull. That's a great episode there. Victimless at Matt D, victimless crime, and that actually takes me to a slight tangent here that I wanted to discuss that I actually never even knew or considered following my initial watch of this episode. But of course, following Spooge basically saying we were in and out like the wind, no one saw us. Victimless crime because the ATM is insured. At the same time, we did see this individual here who was clearly murdered by Spooge. And again, I don't think this is the case. And I actually looked on the credits, but on the Breaking Bad Wikipedia page, it says that this was the same person who helped Walt and Jesse tow their RV out of the ditch on the Indian reservation. But I looked at the credits, and it was not the same. This actor was not credited at all in this episode. Not the ending credits, not on IMDb. And I don't want to sort of, maybe I'm talking out of school here, but again, I'm not sure if these are the same characters. Someone on that Wikipedia page wrote that. I don't think it's true. Maybe these are the same characters. They do look somewhat similar, but I don't think these are the same characters. Like this is the backhoe operator. I think that's who he was, credited as, who pulled Walt and Jesse out of the ditch in the episode entitled "And the Cat's in the Bag." And this is the sort of bodega store owner who was killed by Spooge in this quote unquote victimless crime. To go on Matt D's comment right there. But I don't think this is the same actor. He wasn't credited as such. I've never heard anyone discuss it. I don't think it's the same person. They both have long hair. It definitely seems like two different people. I read it on the Breaking Bad Wikipedia page. I think someone just sort of edited it there on their own and placed it there. I don't think it's true. It wasn't. I wonder. I sort of deep Googled after this, and I don't think it's the same person. They do look similar, I suppose. But I don't think it's the same person. I feel like it would have been much more intentional, or there would have been more of a sort of a hard tell, if you will, where had the same person who helped Walt and Jesse back in season 1 was sort of a victim, in the grand irony of all of this, where he's helping these people out, but in the sort of grand, more morbid irony in all of this, it eventually leads to his own demise. And of course, following this, we then see sort of Spooge try to break into this ATM machine. Quite the nickname for Spooge. I sort of glossed over that in the initial beginning, where, of course, Jesse identifies himself as Diesel here to these two sort of, I don't know what you call them, jib heads or whatever you want to, whatever sort of euphemism that Jesse's used about meth users. But of course, Spooge is quite a nickname, and Spooge is actually quite a euphemism for a certain bodily functional fluid, if you will, from my quick Google search. So definitely a pretty hilarious scene there. More of the sort of comedy that was interjected in this episode, where he tells Skinny Pete, you ripped off a guy named Spooge, not Diesel, not Mad Dog. You got ripped off by Spooge. And he's like, hey man, I don't care what his name is. All I know is that knife that's like 9 inches that he stuck in my face. And that was my Skinny Pete impression. Wasn't it great? But of course, continuing in the story here, we see Spooge trying to bust open this ATM machine. And of course, when not a lot of progress is being made, junkies, there you go. That's the sort of word that would have been much easier to use at Justin Cruz. Jesse sort of saying, what's taking so long? You told me you boosted like 6 of these. Of course, his lady saying, boosted, but he never got one open. And of course, he then proceeds to call his lady a skank. And while Jesse's red line in the sands might be people hurting children, this lady's line in the sand is being called a skank, because this is definitely what she is definitely going to keep it real on. She is not going to sort of sit back and be insulted and affronted by her husband or whoever this sort of man is to her, and is this sort of foreshadowing the sort of word that is eventually going to lead to Spooge's demise here in this episode. And again, amidst the Spooge trying to break open this ATM machine, we get to go back to this at Luke Cockburn. We get to go back to this wonderful sort of philosophical discussion here, where we see this young child peacefully sleeping. Very sort of, ironic here, where we see the tarantula over here. Serious Drew Sharp sort of vibes, and you wonder if it was sort of intentional by the creators to sort of pick a tarantula and sort of, displaying this stuffed animal being a sort of analogy and a sort of metaphor for the innocence of children, including sort of, what happens to Drew Sharp later down the line in season 5 of Breaking Bad in the episode entitled Dead Freight. And of course, following Jesse seeing this child in the sort of, sort of in the moment, sort of being introspective and ruminating on all the things we talked about the sort of horrible suffering that this child has to experience. He sort of goes up to this woman and says, why are you such a terrible mother? Can't you feed this kid a decent meal every now and again? And of course, despite Jesse's sort of prodding here and pleading for her to sort of turn her life around and be a better mother, she clearly is not caring about what Jesse says at all, and is clearly only myopically focused on her next hits and getting high again. And of course, her basically saying to Jesse, for one hit, I'll be any kind of mother you want to be. Just basically saying that I just want to get high. This drug has totally consumed my life. It is, it's all I think about. It's eventually going to probably lead to my death. It is just, my entire existence is just circulated around getting this drug and using this drug. That is my entire existence. I'm entirely dependent on it. And it is quite the sort of food for thought. And of course, Jesse's still under the influence of methamphetamine, probably coming down a little bit from it then. Clearly frustrated by the lack of progress that's happening by busting open this ATM machine to sort of get back the money that was taken from him. He proceeds to sort of bang on this with a sledgehammer, and Spooge and his lady sort of, give each other a look, sort of contemplating sort of their existence and their sort of next move in all of this. Which again, eventually just sort of, again, the ebb and flow of the story of where it will eventually go between these 3 people who are clearly under the influence of methamphetamine in the scene. That would be something at Kate Valentine. I don't know if they could pull that. I don't know if they could pull having Lois as the wife instead of Skyler. That would be, talk about a little bit too much, talk about a little bit too surreal at Kate Valentine. I definitely don't know if that could work. That would be something though if they literally had the same characters. And imagine if Frankie Muniz was played by Was Jesse Pinkman was played by Frankie Muniz instead of Aaron Paul. That would have been something. My goodness. At Kate Valentine, that would have been hilarious. But of course, following this, we then see Walt and Gretchen at this restaurant in Santa Fe. And again, I was scratching my head here. I did wonder if this was sort of like this one of the same restaurants that I'm literally missing up that Jimmy and Kim ever went to over the course of Breaking Bad. Went during during season 2, if I'm not mistaken, when Jimmy was living in Santa Fe. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if there's any direct confirmation in any of this. I'd have to sort of deep Google that. And just, there's a lot of sort of misinformation out there, like I even displayed about this sort of backhoe operator online. So we'd have to sort of, really sort of, go through the information with a fine-tooth comb to find out if this actually was like this one of the same locations that we saw over the course of Better Call Saul. But of course, why did I play that? But of course, following this, we then finally see the sort of final sort of confrontation between Gretchen and Walt that had been building over the course of this episode, and we see Walt tell Gretchen that he apologizes to her for getting her mixed up in his all of this. It was never his intention to sort of get her involved in his methamphetamine cooking processes. He doesn't say that to her outright, and he apologizes to getting her involved, but of course stops short of apologizing for lying to her and saying that he doesn't owe her any explanation in any of this. And of course, where he basically says, I don't owe you a sort of an explanation. I owe you an apology, and now I've apologized to you twice. I deeply apologize. That's 3 times. And for any sort of Curb Your Enthusiasm fans out there, it definitely sort of reminds me to the episode again. I don't know the title, but the episode where Larry gets the sort of bow from the owner. I'm not even, maybe the owner of the Japanese restaurant, and he sort of gets the little itty bitty bow. And when he meets the sort of Japanese tourists in public, basically saying that this was a dismissive bow, this was like no apology at all, basically saying that he's not sorry. And that's sort of where my mind went to in this scene here, where Walt's dismissiveness and his apology really doesn't come across as an apology at all. It really comes across as him being incredibly dismissive to Gretchen and basically saying, I really don't owe you anything. Yes, you somehow got caught up in my personal life. I apologize for that. That's all I'm going to apologize for. I'm not going to tell you why I lied to my family. I don't owe you any explanation. You're not involved in my life. This is my business. And of course, Gretchen continuing to prod, basically saying that, you involve me in your lie, you lie to me, you tell your family that we're paying for your treatment in full, an offer which still stands, by the way, and you don't tell me why. And of course, Walt then doubling down, tripling down, saying, yep, that's pretty much it. I don't owe you any explanation. And of course, this scene eventually builds to Walt basically stating his grievances regarding how he feels that he was mistreated and that he was, what's the word I'm looking for here? He was mistreated. He was, again, the word is escaping me here. He was definitely sort of, he sort of his airing of his grievances to sort of use a Seinfeld Festivus analogy, but yes, really feeling that he was wronged. He was sort of, again, the word is escaping me here, but he was wronged, and he sort of feels that Gretchen and Elliot cut him out, as I talked about earlier in this stream, where he feels that they stole his research and sort of build this empire and all of it, and I was mistreated, I was abused. I was sort of, I did not deserve anything that happened to me over the course of our business venture together. Of course, we don't have the full story at this point in time. We don't know about the $5,000 buyout, which we'll find out down the line in season 5 of Breaking Bad. But of course, at the same time, it's sort of, we really, despite Walter White's objections here and his belief that he was sort of taken advantage of here by Gretchen and Elliot, at the same time, Gretchen says, that's not how I see it. You left us. You abandoned us. You abandoned me. Of course, there's this sort of very nebulous story about how, and again, we know the sort of backstory that they were once in a relationship together at some point in time, and now, of course, Gretchen is with Elliot, but how clearly they were together at some time, and I believe, I forgot exactly where it was. Was it, I forgot exactly where. Somewhere they're on some vacation or something to that effect. Again, I'm sort of editorializing here, but of course, without sort of wanting to get bogged down all the nitty gritty of all this, it's sort of a he said, she said, if you will, and whether or not Walt was actually sort of abused in the manner that he feels like he was. Is really up for debate. We don't know the full story. And at the same time, it's definitely possible that Walt is not sort of looking in the mirror here and sort of thinking about how he was responsible for what happened in his life and sort of clearly wanting to shift that blame onto someone else, saying it's not my fault that I wasn't more successful in my life because I was taken advantage of. You guys stole my life's work and my research from me. It had nothing to do with me willfully accepting this buyout for whatever reason, my sort of being risk averse, just my own sort of risk aversion and my sort of own decision making about how I willfully consented to give up my share of this company for $5,000 at the time. And again, at the end of the day, we'll never know what actually happened because we only have bits and pieces of this entire story. But irrespective of what happened, about how Walt feels aggrieved, Gretchen saying that's not what happened, more or less you willfully left. Again, the sort of truth is maybe a little bit in the middle. We can definitely see this sort of the grievance that Walter White absolutely has been harboring his entire life. This definitely did not come from thin air. And despite the fact he was this Mr. Chips character, he was absolutely holding on to all of this. Gretchen, of course, saying things like what happened to you? This is not who you are. Walt saying like, you don't know a damn thing about me, essentially. Insulting her, basically saying how she was sort of a rich kid, she was entitled, etc. Even I would imagine, even if Gretchen is sort of thinking that the cancer is sort of the reasoning behind Walter White's actions here in this scene, it's still not really an excuse for him to be such an asshole, for lack of a better term. And again, despite Walt being this Mr. Chips character who never did anything wrong in his life, at the same time, he absolutely was harboring these resentments and held on to them and was repressing them, and they were somewhere deep down inside of him. And, maybe without the cancer diagnosis, they likely would have never come out, and he likely would have literally never had this, FU sort of, I don't know, it's sort of not FU money, but this sort of FU sort of credence where, I'm going to be dead soon. Why hold back? What do I have to lose? I'm literally going to tell you to F off here in this scene. And that, of course, is the breaking point for Gretchen, where she, literally gets up and storms out because she is clearly unbelievably insulted by all of this. And of course, you wonder, when later when Skyler tells him that Gretchen called, like, you wonder in the moment, again, Walt's probably not thinking very rationally here. For such an intelligent, rational person, he's definitely not thinking about the long-term ramifications of what he's doing right here, and is truly just airing his grievances to Gretchen here in this scene about how he just feels affronted and how he feels like he was taken advantage of. And at Luke Cockburn, at the end of the day, we'll never know the truth. It's a philosophical argument through and through, but yeah, it's really sort of adding these layers of nuance and peeling back the layers of the onion to the sort of the person that Walter White is, and who he always was, and how Gretchen is essentially saying, what happened to you? This is not who you were. But again, the sort of philosophy question was sort of, did Walt change after his cancer diagnosis, or was this sort of persona always a part of him, it was just repressed? Again, the philosophical wonderful debate that we could go back and forth with forever, that we may never know. But yeah, great sort of scene here through and through, where Walt finally sort of boils over here and just states his grievance that he probably, maybe he had been repressing it, maybe he didn't think about it on a day-to-day basis. He definitely didn't feel this way, maybe as strongly when he went to Elliot's birthday party in the episode entitled Gray Matter. But yeah, it's a great sort of, it's an intense scene, and this is such an intense episode. One of the least sort of lighthearted and comedic episodes of all of Breaking Bad. Definitely the opposite of that PepsiCo Frito-Lay popcorners commercial that we're going to see this Sunday that's already been posted on YouTube. But yeah, really intense stories back to back. And yeah, what a juxtaposition of this sort of the emotional turmoil that Walt is going through directly compared to what Jesse is going through. And of course, in this scene, we can definitely see him sort of really coming down from his high, as well as Spooge. And of course, when he sees his kid, definitely letting his guard down here after being in this house for so long, playing peekaboo with this kid again, wanting to just sort of, his natural biological inclination to sort of, bond with this child. Of course, this is immediately interrupted by him letting his guard down and the lady smacking him over the head with an empty 40 bottle, knocking Jesse out unconscious. We then see him being held at gunpoint by his lady, and eventually she gets a Spooge to help him, taking the H and the amphetamines off his person, then holding the knife and gun to his face. Clearly could have killed Jesse here in this situation, but likely was more focused on getting high and also seeing that Jesse was completely passed out. Not wanting to sort of, make a mess of him here, and also clearly also not thinking very rationally, not tying him up, not doing anything. Both of these people probably in absolute withdrawal for not being able to use drugs for as long as they did. Clearly, had probably gone hours and hours and hours without using, clearly coming down, needing to get high, not thinking rationally. But Jesse definitely seems like a goner here, but just with the nature of the show as it is, you wouldn't imagine that this is the sort of end of Jesse Pinkman. And that's sort of the, even in the moment, I thought, Jesse will somehow get out of this, but, who knows how. And he's clearly not in a good situation here through and through. And yeah, talk about the sort of comedic nature of the following episode where, talks about how he had a gun on me, and Walt eventually, the look on Walt's face when he realizes that somehow Spooge, these junkies somehow got his gun on Jesse in this episode. So yeah, a really dark sort of scene here. Jesse letting his guard down, trying to bond with this child, and it's such, letting his guard down, trying to be a good person, but of course, no good deed goes unpunished. He gets knocked out cold by this, by some lady here in this scene. At Hine, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate the support. Anton, thanks again for the great commentary and insights. Really appreciate the very kind words at Hine. I really do. Really love talking about all the sort of very, the very sort of deep philosophical nature of all of the show. And as I talked about, despite how frustrating it is to have these discussions, it is still very intellectually stimulating, as pretentious as that sounds, to talk about. So I really appreciate the support at Hine and the very kind words. Thank you again so much for the support. At Sam Fisher, Howdy got a genetics quiz tomorrow. That is cool. That is pretty cool. Genetics is always a very interesting subject matter, very interesting science. I'm definitely untrained, no formal education in that sort of venue, but it's definitely an interesting subject matter at Sam Fisher. But of course, following this, we then get a great POV shot here. Thumbs up for Breaking Bad being the best show with POV shots of all time. Love the POV shot of the refrigerator where Walt gets a beer after that experience he has in Santa Fe. Of course, Skyler asking him where he's been all day. Of course, alluding, are we past that? Sort of alluding to just, giving up on the fact that, her husband is just, storming off, not storming off, but yes, sort of storming off all day and not saying where he's going. Walt, of course, not really knowing what to say here. And before he can even get a word in edgewise, Skyler tells him that Gretchen called. Of course, Walt absolutely taken aback by this, wondering if, as I discussed a little bit earlier, his lie is going to completely sort of boil over here and be ruined. If, Gretchen used this sort of opportunity of being unbelievably insulted to come clean and tell off Walt here and say that he had been lying this entire time. It would clearly be in her rights, and it would make a lot of sort of logical sense in terms of her feeling sort of emotionally affronted by what Walt did to her earlier in Santa Fe. Again, Skyler then says that, Gretchen called when you were gone, basically saying that they're not going to be able to pay for the treatment anymore. She's sorry and abruptly ended the conversation there. Her basically trying to put two and two together here, saying she comes here, we have a very nice conversation, you show up, she abruptly leaves, you follow her to her car, and then she doesn't pay for the cancer treatment. What's going on here? I'm not an idiot. Something's clearly going on here. Walt then, of course, saying that he met with her in Santa Fe. Her and Elliot's, of course, telling a very half truth here. Yeah, that's Sam Fisher talking. Yeah, ego being a true sort of thing here in this scene for sure. Um, yeah, that's a great point for sure at Sam Fisher. But of course, Walt then of course spinning this lie, we're basically saying that they're broke again, not wanting to sort of rehash all of the dialogue, but basically using the premise that the financial crisis of 07, 08, which they're currently living in, has caused Gray Matter to be financially insolvent, cash poor. Again, Walt just sort of making up these lies, basically saying they were just as vulnerable as everybody else. Skyler just totally being taken aback by this. Walt basically, continuing this lie, saying we're going to be okay. Most of the treatment is already paid for. Um, you know, basically, continuing this lie. And again, this is also, without wanting to get bogged down in all the details, I've also definitely thought about the fact how, like, as tumultuous as the relationship between these two characters has been, at the same time, like I talked about, the bond of family is still very strong. And no matter how Skyler may feel about Walt, she still cares for him and loves him at this moment in time, despite all of his sort of irrational behavior. And as affronted as she feels by his lying, maybe, again, we don't know. It's just my interpretation. We don't know what Skyler's thinking. But, maybe she just sort of rationalizes it as, yes, he's being a jackass, but he did just get diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. He's going to be dead soon. I guess he's going to act irrationally this way and not let me in his life in these respects for whatever reason. And, that's definitely something I noticed where, despite in the previous few episodes where the relationship looked like it was just not going to be able to stand the sort of test of time, at the same time, things really seem to be in many ways strongly reconciled here, in my humble opinion. So, yeah, it's definitely something to think about for sure. But yeah, that Stone Yoda, that's a great point that you raise, where she says, where she finally comes to terms with the fact that they're bankrupt or broke and can't pay for his treatment anymore. But of course she says, all this, and she still drives a Bentley. And of course Walt says, yeah, keeping up appearances. Again, it is sort of a little bit cringe that Stone Yoda and that Sam Fisher boosting his own ego, because again, it's sort of like he's sort of implying, well, they have a lot of pride. That's why they didn't come clean to you, and that's why they're still driving this car. And the sort of the enormous, again, I'm saying it again, repeating myself, the enormous grand irony in all of this is that the amount of pride that Walter White exhibits in this episode as well, and over the course of this series, for being so prideful that what is he going to do? Is he going to really accept this money from these people who he feels like stole this money from him in the first place? He's going to get down on his hands and knees and beg, as he says directly to Gretchen here in this episode. Like, the amount of pride that Walter White is living with here, and the sort of aggrandizement of his own ego causing his own decision-making over the course of this series, of, literally wanting to manufacture methamphetamine and deal with homicidal lunatics like Tuco Salamanca, to paraphrase Walter White himself. He would rather do that than to, do what in his mind would be groveling, would be something that would slight his own pride, his own ego, by taking what he felt to be sort of a handout or charity by Gretchen and Elliot, where the coup de grace is that not only am I begging and groveling towards these people, but I truly hate these people for cutting me out of this business and for stealing from me. It is really sort of it is very ironic. At Sam Fisher, at Stone Yoda, the sort of that sort of line that Walter White gives to Skyler here in this scene, and it is kind of funny, the sort of he said, she said, and how it maybe is a little bit in the middle, and we'll never know the whole story because it was never displayed to us. The sort of story where Walt says, you cut me out, Gretchen saying you left on your own. It definitely sort of reminded me of that scene in the episode entitled "To Say My Name," when Walt and Mike have that coming to blows in that episode, where sort of Walt says, you screw up and get yourself followed by the DEA, and somehow this is my fault. And of course Mike loses it and says, we had a good thing, you messed this up, we had Fring. And of course, the truth is, maybe, again, who is really sort of in the right here? In the grand scheme of things, I really sort of empathize and sympathize more with Mike in that situation as opposed to Walter. So irrespective of how, the point I'm trying to get at here, the long-winded point I'm trying to get at here, is irrespective of how Walter White feels, at the same time, maybe there's a lot of truth to what Gretchen is saying about how no one cut them out. You just were risk-averse and didn't want to sort of build this company from the very beginning, and all the sort of risks and pitfalls that come from building a publicly traded company, you just didn't have it in you to do this. You accepted a buyout for your 1/3 share at $5,000 when that was probably what it was worth at the time. Maybe, again, no one put a gun to Walter White's head that we know of and forced him to sort of take these shares at a much sort of decreased rate from what they were actually worth. It's just sort of the way Walter White is sort of spinning it in his head. And it is kind of crazy where maybe in the moment you sort of empathize with Walt and you think he's being sincere in his sort of, airing of his grievances, to again quote Seinfeld, the airing of the grievances with Festivus. But at the same time, despite how he feels that Mike messed everything up in Breaking Bad, at the same time, Mike's kind of right. Walt's own pride and ego got in the way, like it maybe got in the way with whatever happened with gray matter, which again we'll never know. We'll only be able to have this wonderful philosophical debate about for years and years to come if we choose. But of course, thus, pretty much ending this, the sort of B story here of Walt and Skyler in this episode. And finally, following this, we get back to the A story here. We're following Jesse getting knocked out unconscious by this lady with this empty 40 bottle. We then see that he comes to here and he regains his consciousness. And of course, we then see Spooge still trying to bust open this ATM at the bottom because he feels like, the weakest point of the safe will be the bottom. His lady even saying that doesn't make any sense. Why would you, why wouldn't you just make the whole thing strong? Of course, Jesse became a bullfish here in this scene. That's Sam Fisher. That is too funny, man. But of course, Jesse clearly trying to bide his time. Again, I don't want to sort of we've all seen this scene. But of course, these two junkies clearly under the influence, too focused on what they're doing here to even notice that this person that they knocked out is regaining his consciousness. Jesse trying to sort of, fake it, kind of like, sort of a callback to how he said, Crazy H should act. I would be, if I was knocked out, I'd be all faking it, yo, to paraphrase Jesse Pinkman. But of course, following Spooge basically telling his lady to stop bothering him, he's doing important business, you skank. Again, the foreshadowing finally comes to blows here where she again tries to initially take the high road here and say, apologize to me. But Spooge, of course, doubles, triples down here, basically repeating the word again and again and again and again, basically saying that's what you are. I don't care about how you feel. Of course, at the same time, we know that the sort of premise of this conversation is that she took too much H, and she's starting to really sort of come down and really be under the influence of this downer here, wanting to sort of have more of the uppers from the other side of the speedball. Spooge not wanting to give his share because she lost the rest of it, according to him. And of course, following Spooge just being totally focused on trying to bust open this ATM machine. It's then followed by some lady pushing this ATM machine and crushing his head with it and killing him. So, pretty unceremonious ending to the character of Spooge. And my God, life comes at you fast, I suppose, where you're wanting the services of James Morgan McGill Esquire, a.k.a. Saul Goodman, in the back of a nail salon. You seem to be well put together. You're dressed well. You're not a sort of total tweaker with scabs all over your body. And then in just a few years' time down the line, 3 years down the line, you're this woman you meet kills you and crushes your head with an ATM machine when you're under the influence of methamphetamine and don't realize it. Thus ending the story of Spooge. So yeah, quite the again, we all have our shit, man. We really do. I mean, there's a story there in Spooge, and as much as we, maybe just sort of, at Sam Fisher, see Spooge as this sort of comic relief and this very, very, very dark comic relief. At the same time, you could probably spin a pretty sad story in there with what happened in his life about where his life started and where it eventually ended up. And, who knows at the end of the day what happened and what caused him to sort of go down this path. And then sort of all the sort of emotional sympathy that Jesse Pinkman gets. I feel like, every single person has their sort of sob story. Everyone has their sort of, all the sort of bad things that happened in their life that sort of caused them to sort of go down these sort of terrible roads. So, his actor said he thinks Spooge was a former EMT. That's interesting. I guess it's definitely up to the interpretation of anyone watching this. But yeah, that's sort of a discussion for a whole different video in respect to what sort of happened between those 3 years. We sort of know what happened between those 3 years. He eventually got way too addicted to methamphetamine and to other drugs. But you wonder what sort of was the catalyst by which Spooge basically completely destroyed his life. That's a sort of grand overarching question at Sam Fisher. But of course, following this lady effectively killing the the sort of the father of her child. She then takes the sort of methamphetamine office person to sort of use herself. And of course, she's so out of it, she can't even sort of, doesn't even care about the fact that Jesse has regained consciousness. She's so under the influence here. She then sort of clearly shoots up, or I don't know, maybe smokes it, or maybe crushes it up and inhales it. Or I know I've seen live PD. I know some people even eat methamphetamine sometimes. But of course, following this, and we see her pass out on the couch. We then see Jesse take back his gun, take back this. I think he even takes back the dope, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to sort of play the scene because I got copyright strikes for playing too much of the episode the last time. So I think he takes back the sort of excrement covered bags of blue stuff. I think he takes that back. I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to sort of play it here. I guess I could try to cover it up with my big ugly face. But I think I'll leave it as is. Yeah, I think he picked it up as well. But of course, we then see Jesse proceed to wipe his fingerprints off of everything, not wanting his fingerprints to be all over this crime scene here. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, when he's eventually wiping down the ATM machine, it eventually opens up and all the money falls out. He then, of course, takes back the money and some. And I always wondered, again, I'm definitely being way too nitpicky here, but you would wonder when they load an ATM machine, those serial numbers, I imagine, are all sort of cataloged. And they can definitely know where the money came from and stuff like that from a stolen ATM machine. So again, you wonder, I guess, if anyone ever finds those bills. But I'm really nitpicking here. At the end of the day, he sort of gets back the money that was sort of owed to him, if you will, in a sort of very sort of twisted, nebulous way. He gets back the money from the ATM machine. He gets back the sort of a crystal that was stolen from him. He wipes down his fingerprints on everything that he can before immediately fleeing. But of course, prior to doing this, of course, wiping down the marshmallow fluff, trying to wipe down everything that he touched. He then, of course, calls 911 and proceeds to leave. But prior to him doing so, he can't quite leave the house as he's doing. He first has to sort of, he doesn't want to leave this kid in the state to sort of stumble out on his father's just bloody corpse and his mom nodded off on heroin. Again, probably not the bloody corpse, but he's probably seen his parents high all the time. Of course, following this, we see Jesse saying, let's play Peekaboo. Remember Peekaboo, cover your eyes, don't look. Clearly not wanting to sort of distort the innocence of this child any more than it clearly already has been over the course of his very, very short, unfortunate life here. Of course, he takes him outside, basically saying, it's all part of the game. Don't go back in the house. We can see Jesse being very emotionally traumatized by this scene, going up to this kid and saying, hey, man, have a nice life, kid. Have a nice rest of your life. Clearly, social service is going to take you away. There's no way in the world you should be living in this state. Spooge is dead, but this woman is going to be charged with all sorts of heinous crimes. I don't know if they have any sort of, drugs on their person. They'll have plenty of paraphernalia with all those sort of hypodermic needles everywhere, likely being charged with drug paraphernalia, possession, child endangerment, all sorts of sort of child endangerment crimes. To sort of really sort of have this, thus ending this, episode here when Jesse eventually sort of runs off in the distance after telling this kid to have a nice life. As we see, this kid sort of sitting on the stoop waiting for the police to come after Jesse calls 911. Again, it's the sort of very fun, unanswerable question of how much responsibility does Jesse bear in all of this in respect to this child's life. And again, maybe not a lot. Maybe it's sort of a very philosophical discussion about how much culpability the sort of manufacturer has in the sort of suffering of children, the sort of unintended consequence of all of that, about how, Jesse manufacturing methamphetamine, the unintended consequence of this was having this child suffer directly at his hands. Yes, he didn't sort of physically cause this person, this child to be endangered, but it sort of indirectly led to that. And, clearly he's very upset about that. He doesn't get to ruminate on it with Walt too much in the following episode, but he does talk about the kid to Walt even very briefly. And as I talked about over the course of this episode, we know that this sort of thing of Jesse, of the suffering of children, is really his red line in the sand. Again, there's got to be a better sort of idiom than that, but it's really his sort of breaking point. It's really his sort of guiding moral compass, where he does not want children to be endangered. But in the grand scheme of things, I would say that Jesse just has to be naive, where he truly thinks, hey, I can manufacture methamphetamine, I can sell it to consenting adults, and children don't have to suffer. Like, how in the world is that even possible? Where Jesse can sort of rationalize how I can continue going down the line and continue living this life that I'm living, and no children are going to suffer. It's not my fault if children suffer. I'm doing everything right and above board. I'm being the sort of, the sort of Marcus of Queensberry methamphetamine manufacturer. I'm doing this all by the book. I would never hurt any children. And all the sort of unintended consequences of children suffering, i.e., this child, Tomas being killed by the rival dealers, Drew Sharp being killed as a consequence of their robbery and dead freight, Brock's mother being killed. All of this, I didn't sort of directly cause any of this. Even the fact that, you could sort of put it in a sick, twisted way about how Lydia got involved with Walt and Jesse has some moral culpability in the fact that Lydia's sort of daughter has to suffer as well in many respects. It's such a sort of moral, conundrum, if you will, about who you sort of lay the blame at in respect to all these, life problems. I feel like in many respects, with the sort of smoking epidemic that we had in this country when it was truly at its worst, we sort of blamed the tobacco companies for pushing this product on the people. We didn't sort of say, well, these are consenting adults, and it's not the tobacco company's fault for making this product. It's the person's fault for using it. It's kind of like we sort of do the opposite there. It seems very sort of arbitrary, as is a lot of the things in our society, unfortunately. But yeah, just a lot of food for thought in this episode at Justin Cruz. Very gory, sad, and a little comedic episode. It was good. A good episode, a very gory one. Yes, very gory. One of the least comedic episodes through and through at Justin Cruz. I know I've said this again and again, but yeah, definitely not one it's not one you sort of naturally gravitate towards and wanting to sort of rewatch again and again. It's a really sort of emotionally tough one to watch at Justin Cruz. But there had to be some comic relief, but there's not a lot. It's a tough one. This is a notorious one for sure. This is a notoriously tough episode to watch at Justin Cruz. At Stone Yoda, in the episode Better Call Saul, Saul mentions how she admitted the police killed Spooge. Yeah, down the line. Yeah, for sure, that comes in. Ozymandias would probably take that place as being really dark. Yeah, that one's pretty dark too. Yeah, again, for an early episode, for one very early in the go of things, when season 2 is much more lighthearted than the rest of the seasons, this is clearly the darkest episode that we had up to this point of Breaking Bad so far. So yeah, it was a tough one, and again, it's definitely always something I've thought about how, yes, I know I'm a broken record here with how I talk about how I don't understand why people love Jesse so much and give him the benefit of the doubt all the time. But they poor Jesse, etc., etc. He did everything by the book. He was so morally upstanding. He's not morally culpable in any of this. Maybe I'm sort of maybe people actually don't feel that way, but yeah, it's just how much not suffering, but how much sort of moral responsibility we put at his feet specifically for the suffering of this child and all the other children that suffer as well, that I talked about a little bit earlier when I talked about those 2 real news stories of, parents nodding off on heroin with needles in their arm, completely passed out, overdosing while their child is, strapped in the backseat of the car. It's a too real of an experience, and to think that only this kid, Drew Sharp, Brock, Tomas, were the only children that suffered is a fallacy. Thousands and thousands of children, if not more, probably suffered indirectly as a result of people using Walt and Jesse's methamphetamine. But at the same time, how much blame do we lay at Marlboro for being the if someone dies prematurely of lung cancer and they smoked Marlboro cigarettes, we sort of blame the tobacco companies for, pushing this on to people and, not being completely forthright with the dangers of their product. But, here we're sort of saying, I feel like at the same with harder drugs, we sort of, we do blame the users, I feel. We do sort of blame everyone. We blame the users, we blame the drug dealers, and we blame the drug manufacturers, and Jesse is one of them. So, Jesse Pinkman, despite him being sort of this, in the heroes Wikipedia, there's the heroes Wikipedia, and Jesse Pinkman is there. I don't know how much of a hero Jesse Pinkman is. I really don't. A hero is kind of seems like a little bit of a stretch for that character. At Sam Fisher, when I see my roommate watch it, he hates Jesse. He keeps saying he's the reason for all of Walt's problems, and I'm starting to agree with him. Yeah, it's sort of the thing I've talked about at Sam Fisher about how, the sort of, your perception and your sort of moral sympathy for these characters definitely ebbs and flows as you watch this show. And of course, in the moments, and when I was first watching this, I definitely didn't feel about Jesse the way I feel right now. I definitely, thought his character was almost like kind of this kind of very interesting sort of, cool, interesting character, this sort of, interesting character in this sort of Albuquerque criminal underworld. But the more you kind of see him and the more you just sort of see people's response to his, his actions over the course of the show, it just kind of, the way my sort of perspective of this character tended to change. So, man, this chair really sort of crinks when you really makes a lot of noise. At Charlie Hennings, Jesse was a lot like Mike when it came to people, not in the game. Mike wanted to go after Hector because he killed civilians. Jesse was very similar, especially with... That's a great point you raised at Charlie Hennings and how, that whole speech about Mike saying to Price, you're a criminal, it's your choice whether or not to be a good one or a bad one. And, Mike has this sort of honor built in him where he wants to be this good criminal who abides by this certain code. And Jesse sort of, too, he has a sort of own code that he wants to abide by. But the grand irony in all of this is that Mike sort of even thinks that it's possible. At least he did at one point, and again, he eventually matures and grows up and finds out that you sort of can't sort of, correct mistakes that can't be corrected. But yeah, that's the sort of, Mike wants to live by this sort of code, but, all the other people, like Lalo Salamanca, definitely does not live by that code. He does not care if you're in the game or out of the game. If you're Fred Whalen and you're in the way, he is going to absolutely waste you and think nothing of it. He's not going to, let you go because you're not in the game at Charlie Hennings. So that's kind of an interesting point where, yes, when Mike was like younger, in air quotes, he maybe didn't realize that, or at least younger in his experience in this world, but he definitely sort of matured as he grew up over time. But yeah, Jesse as well. Again, as I talked about in the previous stream, Jesse's maturity is definitely noticeable, but it's very sort of it's very slow. It's a very sort of slow sort of maturity that it takes a while to sort of occur. It's not sort of very rapid maturity. And again, maybe I don't give Jesse a benefit of the doubt. Maybe someone who always has turned to methamphetamine even after hiatuses, where eventually he says, okay, this is the time, this is it, this is when I finally stop using, I can finally put my emotions in check. He always goes back to it, and I sort of say, it can get pretty depressing in Alaska in the winter. It's dark there for, almost 24 hours in the winter. It's pretty dark and depressing, and, Jesse's going to be alone and isolated, and he's a wanted man, and, he has to sort of come to terms with his reality. I know at the end of El Camino, he's driving off into the sort of summer of Alaska, happy ending. He finally sort of came to terms and has matured, and I think in many ways he has, but, I don't know. We'll see. Jesse's still a young man. He's still got decades and decades of life to live, so at the end of the day, I don't think, they've pretty much told that story as they're going to tell it, and I don't see them sort of adding to it in any respect. But yeah, it's he definitely matured at Sam Fisher. That was sort of the premise that they were trying to give to us. Yeah, but Stone Yoda, not just these characters, but all human beings. We're all flawed. Everyone. There are no saints. There are no sort of angelic, perfect people among us. Everyone has flaws. Every single person on this planet is not a saint. We all are human. We all make irrational decisions. We all sort of make mistakes. We're not computers. But it's a lot to think about. What is up at Just Dan? Thanks for tuning in. But every single person, every single human being on this planet. But that's actually a good way to sort of to wrap it up there at Stoned Yoda. But with that being said, I'm going to have to end it here. I really appreciate everyone for tuning in. I apologize for starting a little bit late it was a long day, a little bit flustered in the beginning, a little bit of technical difficulties, but it is what it is. I really appreciate everyone for tuning in tonight. I really appreciate the super chats. Really appreciate the support for everyone who's watched this channel. I really enjoy the conversation. I'll try to do these more regularly. I'll try to do another one of these next week if possible. Definitely hope I can do another one next week. Definitely have to say that this was a tough one. This was one I was kind of not dreading, but it's like it's not as sort of emotionally uplifting, and it's not the sort of most fun episode of Breaking Bad to ever talk about. But Negro y Azul, I mean, Better Call Saul, 4 Days Out, Tortuga's coming in the fold, Saul Goodman's coming in the fold, Gus Fring is coming in the fold, Tyrus is coming in the fold. It's going to be a great sort of assortment of episodes coming up in season 2 of Breaking Bad. So with that, I will end it here. Have the great rest of your night. We'll definitely plan on doing these again. Doing this again, we'll be talking about Negro y Azul next week. 4 Days Out, Stone Yoda, great episode through and through. My goodness, one of my favorite of all time. And I will look forward to doing this again. I will see you guys around. Take it easy. Have a great rest of your night.